Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's final broadcast of Secondary Literacy. Once again, for the last time, broadcasting live from our Secondary Ed studios, 521 on your dial. I'd like to welcome you all into the room for our final session. Tonight, you're going to need your Reader Part 2, obviously, and also Reader Part 1 standing by as we're going to make our last entry into our keyword summarizers, which you will eventually be sending me a screenshot of. Tonight, the IQ we're covering is Chapter 9 in VACA. And at the end of class, you'll drop that into your folder. Once again, our final date for you to get everything in is 12/15. And so if you are still having assignments that are outstanding, that'll be your last chance to get them in for half credit. So any questions or concerns before we begin our session tonight? Okay, and I'm just double checking. You can all hear me, right? Yes, good. Okay, all right. Got a few more people coming in, so let's just sit for a second and get them into the room. They're still coming in. Okay. One second, I gotta stop and one more thing before we go on. There we go. Okay. All right, as always, we're gonna just take a second and do our normal nervous system reset, as we like to call it. So we'll just take a second and relax, do a little breathing, and get ourselves squared away here for tonight's class. Okay, to begin with tonight, would you open up your reader to page 87, and you'll see a cover sheet there that'll say writing across the curriculum, which is our topic for tonight. Before we jump in, there are a couple of things that I want to mention. One is that I've posted a few assignments, I guess, for lack of a better word, from my reading program Inside the Text and What's Happening, and they're posted in Canvas. The reason I'm mentioning this is because I'm not sure how long you actually have access to Canvas after this class is over. So if you are looking at those and you're interested in using them, we'll talk about one or two of them tonight, then you should download it and keep it on your desktop under your 521 file so that you have it. They're Word documents, so you can write right on them. Last week, I gave you the template for the directed reading sequence squeeze sheet, and that's also posted in Canvas. And also the Is That a Fact template, which are also posted in Canvas from this program. So again, it'd be worthwhile to peruse them and see if you can make use of them, and then go ahead and download them so that you have them in perpetuity, I guess is a word to say. Okay, before we begin tonight, I'm going to ask you to write an interpretation of a quote, and you can do this on the back side of page 86 in your reader, or if you have a blank sheet of paper, feel free to use that as well. And before we begin tonight, I'd like you to write a 3 to 5 sentence paragraph that interprets the following quote. And the quote is, "The future is not a gift, it's an option." So if you take a few minutes and just jot down some of your ideas in the form of a paragraph. Can you finish up your last thought? Okay, let's turn to page 88 in your reader. And a few questions that I want to just have a chance to talk over with you, reflecting on your own experiences in secondary school, either middle or high school, in terms of the amount of writing that you did in those settings. So the first question is, how much writing did you do in school, in secondary school? Most of the time, people will tell me that the majority of their writing was done in English classes. How many would agree with that in terms of your own experience? Yes. Okay. So let's talk about the types of writing that you did. When you think about the writing assignments that you had, what were some of the examples that you could share of some of what those assignments might have been? Anybody care to share an idea? Elizabeth?
Normally like a close reading of a book or like an analysis of whatever book we were reading.
Okay. So was that kind of like a book report type of assignment?
It was more like using the theme from this book, like write an essay about
Oh,
that theme.
okay. Sounds a little vague to me still, right? Was that what you was? It was probably vague to you too, right? Yeah. Okay, Tiana.
I actually had a pretty good experience with that in school. We'd write a lot, so anywhere from like a summary to an essay or specific like daily journals or reflections. So there was quite a lot, I would say, with my experience. I think I just got lucky with that.
Okay. Um, what about outside of English class? Tiana, let me just pursue Tiana and then I'll come back.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were asking me. A little bit. I did write some like research papers in science class, but it wasn't, I don't know, like from my experience, they never really explained how to write it. They kind of just assumed that we had learned in our English class already. So they
Mm-hmm.
kind of just said, here, write an essay, and didn't really break it up for us. Because For me, it was a very different process writing a like research paper because I hadn't done that in my English classes at all. So I remember that was challenging for me as a student.
Okay. Somebody else had a hand up. Elizabeth.
I would say like in a history class, we would do like they'd call them DBQs, which would be like trying to relate something going on in one period of history to like another period of history, and like maybe trying to like compare and contrast, or like I don't know, things like that.
Okay. Thank you. Mike?
Some similar stuff. I did a lot of writing in history, and I had one of my biology classes did a lot of writing. It was an AP class, so it might have been something about describing the structures of the nucleus of a cell, or the history class a lot of describing the events that happened in a particular time, or why they happened, or comparing how two events happened, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Leah?
Yes, so I did. I don't remember doing a lot of writing outside of English class, except for in foreign language class. And it was mostly, I guess it's basically, a language class. So that's the only other time I can really remember writing a lot, and in theater classes.
Okay. Oh, and theater class was interesting. Okay. Anybody else care to share what their experiences were?
I'll go. I actually would write. We were required to write in advisory or homeroom.
Oh, okay.
And he would require us to write. And I think I had like a Wattpad phase at some point. So because I had that phase, like that's where I would write. He allowed us to write on that platform too. He did require us that if we didn't have homework, we were required to write.
Any particular topic, or just make it up?
Yeah, make it up, any journal entries, whatever we wanted. He wouldn't like check them to see, like he would just walk around. He just wanted to see us writing.
Mm-hmm. So you could have been writing "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy" over and over again, like The Shining, right? Okay. Interesting. Okay. Well, that's one way to do it. So let me ask you this question. How well did your writing, I guess the question is, well, Michelle, let me go to you now. I see you just had your hand up.
Oh, no. I wanted to answer what you were trying to ask. Yeah.
Me?
I actually wanted to answer what you were trying to ask.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
And I meant like the new question.
Oh, I didn't finish the question. Okay, got it. All right. So my question was, how many of you feel that the writing that you did in secondary school prepared you for the writing you were going to have to do in college?
Okay, this is actually a hard question, because there's like some things that like it did help. Like sometimes they actually required me like to memorize the keywords and then try to like to apply it. For one example, that was one of the teachings. And however, when it came to like trying like to write an essay in college, it required more complex vocabulary and everything else. If you're trying to understand what I'm trying to say, it requires a lot more pages. It requires like tons of more like how do I say, complexity.
So the rigor kicked up quite a bit.
Yeah, it didn't prepare me most of the time. Some of them did save me though.
Okay. Tiana, and then Leah.
I'd say to some extent, like we had to write, I'd say maybe senior year, because we had to write an essay for our senior project. And that was like almost a 10-page essay on research. And I think the way my specific teacher taught it, I did use a lot of those same methods my first year of college. However, I think it was very structured, so I had to step away from writing like the standard like 3 point like thesis statement because I
Mhm.
had gotten so used to that in high school that in college I had to unlearn a lot about unlearn a lot of that, or like the 5 to 8 sentence paragraphs, like just getting unused to things, I guess. But it did prepare me somewhat.
Okay. Leah and then Karen.
Yes. So my experience was it did prepare me, but because I had used, the 3.5 paragraph essay. Just as Tiana said, I actually went into college writing the exact same way.
Uh-huh.
So it took a while to develop. I mean, it was good because it gave me a solid base
Right.
to write. But at some point, I was in over my head in certain classes, especially my science classes, I remember. And it was just, it just didn't, I just didn't feel as prepared my freshman year in college, which was many moons ago. But I feel like it prepared me in one sense because it gave me a base to write. But then whenever I was trying to build, it took my own development, like my own, like, I can't get the words what I'm trying to say, but it took my own motivation to actually go further and to develop my writing.
Just to pursue that a little bit more, were you ever given an example of what the instructor was looking for in the writing that you were supposed to do?
In college or in high school?
Well, in the science class you just talked about.
Oh, no. Because when I first started college, I was going into my major was a science major. So, I mean, I never really got any type of model text at all. No.
So it was basically guess what's in my head. And then,
absolutely.
Mind readers. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that happens a lot. Thank you. Karen?
So I wrote a lot, even starting in junior high. I had the same teacher both years. We wrote an essay every week.
Oh.
And in high school, I wrote a lot as well. I had teachers that were always writing something, whether it was a daily journal entry or an essay. And then I took the advanced placement history class. We did a lot of writing and research, kind of writing in papers and stuff there too. My writing probably didn't really improve much beyond where it was, my junior year in high school, because it didn't need to. The teachers really didn't expect a whole lot more until I got to college. But I had a really good role model my first year that kind of helped us all unlearn that 5 paragraph standard essay.
Uh-huh.
But even now, teaching and working in a school, it's easy. I teach them that and say, if you get really stuck, start here. Start with something and then we'll worry about branching out. But first, let's get the ink flowing and meeting your paper. But
so build.
I don't know. I felt I was fine in school writing. That wasn't my sticking point. But again, I started writing an essay every week in 7th grade, so doesn't really faze me.
Okay, so you got a good foundation to begin with. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. To begin with, how many of you would say that the writing instruction, or let me put it this way: how many of you found that when you were in secondary school, you actually got some writing instruction in any of your classes? Okay, so some of you did. Tiana, did you want to add to that?
I feel like I remember the most from senior year. There was just a lot of things that she taught me that I still use till today, so that means something, I guess, if I'm using it in college. So I would say from that specific teacher, but not so much from like collectively all of my English classes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think one thing we have to consider is that for our students whom we classify as our more novice students, we're going to, they're going to require at some point a little bit more in-depth writing instruction across the entire curriculum. And when I started teaching at Santa Monica College, I asked my students who were just out of high school for the most part, although I did have a couple of grandmothers occasionally in the class because it was a community college. I asked my students to write an essay because I wanted to see how well they could handle it. And basically what I got was a lot of 1 or 2 page essays that were 1 paragraph long that were more akin to a letter to grandma than an actual essay. And I think that the gap was that while they may have done some narrative writing, the informational writing that they were doing was pretty sketchy at best. And in fact, in some cases, it was probably even lacking. So that's when I began to explore some ways of scaffolding some of the things we need to do for our students. So I want to walk you through some of the strategies and show you some options here that we have in working with our students tonight. Now, here's some rules, by the way, on how to write good. All right, so if you pay attention to these rules, you might be okay. First of all, avoid alliteration always. Prepositions are not words to end sentences with. Avoid cliches like the plague. They're old hat. Eschew ampersands and abbreviations, etc. One should never generalize. Comparisons are as bad as cliches. Be more or less specific. Sentence fragments, eliminate. Exaggeration is 1 billion times worse than understatement. Parenthetical remarks, however relevant, are unnecessary. And who needs rhetorical questions? So a little tongue-in-cheek writing rules for you have to follow as you develop your writing. So I guess the first question is, why do we teach how to write the essay? What do you think? Any thoughts? Why do we teach the essay? Elizabeth?
I think it's just a way to get people to like cohesively put their thoughts on a page as opposed to just kind of like jumping from thought to thought. It's like this is a way to organize it and kind of like wrap it up in a nice little bow.
Mm-hmm. So through that, then they can demonstrate that they understand what the topic was in an organized way. Okay. Any other thoughts? Why teach the essay? Tiana and then Mike.
Perhaps to help teach how to like make an argument, because I feel like sometimes I had to argue a side of an essay that I didn't necessarily agree with.
Okay.
So I feel like that's a good skill to have, maybe.
Okay. Let's go to Mike.
It's useful in so many different areas. You know, it's not limited to one particular discipline or subject.
Okay. Elizabeth.
Me or the other one?
Elizabeth Wartarian.
To be creative and invent.
Okay, could you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, because they have to come up with with stories. They have to make it up so that they can be more use their imagination and go broad to what they see and they know and they can touch. You know, they can make it up.
So for a narrative piece, right?
For a narrative, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Mike Colucci.
Wondering if we could define essay a little bit more clearly, because versus what like a short answer might be, or a reflection might be, or a narrative might be, or a short story might be. Like how would you actually define it?
Okay. Can you hold that thought, because I'm going to try to do that tonight.
I can't hold the thought. I'll try.
Okay. I know Thursday night at 7:00. It's hard to hold anything, right?
Yeah, just don't hold me to it.
Yeah, but I'm going to give you a structure tonight that I think will answer that question for you, and then we can pursue it later.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. That's great. Okay, Leah, back to you, and then Malia.
Oh yes, maybe we teach the essay because there are different elements in an essay that if our students hit them, we know that they're organizing their thoughts and they are getting their point across. For example, if they're are they stating a claim? Are they providing a thesis and using evidence and using analysis? Are they citing evidence so that their claim, whatever their claim is, that they can, support it with evidence. So I think that's maybe why we teach just the organization of an essay.
Okay, so there's something about having a structure to the writing that's important, yes? We would say? Yeah. Okay. Malia, what do you think?
Kind of piggybacking, I don't even know how to speak today, whatever. What Leah said and Elizabeth said, kind of like interpreting like their own like voice from what they're reading or what they're trying to convey.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Okay, so an element of voice comes into play, and in different types of writing, it requires different types of voice. For example, in a narrative, obviously you have the voice of possibly a character or somebody embedded in the story, whereas in an informational text, you have more of an editorial voice, right, where it's a little bit less expressive, perhaps, in that type of writing. It's more of that more academic style of writing as opposed to something that would be having more reaction, more dialogue, more characteristics of a narrative text versus informational. Okay. But Elizabeth, again, moratorium?
I think it's a lot related to our jobs. For example, if we are argumentative, lawyers have to be argumentative, I believe. Like that's very linked to the jobs that they do. Like you have most of it argumentative. I do believe it's very important. One of the most important like essays. Narrative, if we are speaking, it's form of a speech, because when you're talking to somebody, how to put that in order and to answer the questions and stuff. So it's very related to our jobs and our lives.
Okay. Good ideas here from the discussion. So a friend of mine that I taught with at Santa Monica College used to say that the essay is the currency of college, because in college, some of you might have experienced this. There are a lot of essays to be written when you're in college. Would that be correct? Is that a correct assumption? That when you're in college, that you're going to write more essays than you would be typically in a secondary school?
Yes.
Again, because textbooks won't have questions at the back of the chapter for you to answer and constitute your grade that way. So let me just submit to you another idea about the essay that I don't think is commonly thought about, and that is that really the essay is a comprehension strategy. And the reason why it's a comprehension strategy is because not only do you have to organize the information, but you have to have a good command of the information you're organizing. And what we know is that in doing the construction of a structured essay that is informative, whether it's argumentative or persuasive or informative, that the ability to organize it as you create it is what gets it embedded into the spider webs to make the information more retrievable. So in effect, when you're able to write a cohesive, coherent, complex essay, you're actually building a comprehension network in your brain for those spider webs to make those connections, which also makes it more retrievable. And the process of writing is a way to slow down the input so that it doesn't overwhelm short-term memory, if that makes sense. So there's a lot to the idea of why we have kids write essays for all the different reasons that you said, but one that isn't articulated as often, I think, is the idea of the essay being a comprehensive strategy. So a couple things to think about. In chapter 10, a lot of you in your IQs talked about the notion of summarization as part of an interesting tool too. So I want to share something about that in a little bit as well. But let me share a little research for you at first. We know that 3/4 of both 12th and 8th graders lack proficiency in writing, according to the most recent National Assessment of Educational Progress. And 40% of those who took the ACT writing exam in the high school class of 2016 lack the reading and writing skills necessary to successfully complete a college-level composition class, according to the company's data. The issue now that we're facing is, coming off the pandemic, the learning loss is even greater. So I would say the percentage of kids who can't perform in terms of being able to satisfy requirements for a college writing course are probably even more severe than they were now. So from a content literacy perspective, writing about ideas and concepts encountered in text will improve students' acquisition of content more than simply reading without writing. When reading and writing are taught in concert, this union fosters problem solving and makes thinking and learning more powerful than if they were engaged separately. So the implication here is that no matter what our subjects, having students engaged in some writing activities can be helpful in terms of, again, their comprehending the material. You know, and the question I always ask is, do students write essays outside of English? And typically in college, they will. And the caption here says, to put it in context, think of the essay as a collection of tweets only joined together, all right? So that's one way to contextualize it for our novice students. So a recent study sheds light on why writing is such a beneficial activity, not just in subjects typically associated with writing, like history and English, which are predominantly the courses where kids write, but across all subjects. Professor Steve Graham and his colleagues at ASU Teachers College analyzed 56 studies looking at the benefits of writing in science, social studies, and math, and found that writing reliably enhanced learning across all grade levels. And again, it may not be the essay. There are different forms of writing that you saw as examples in Chapter 9 that give you a good sampling and catalog of different kinds of writing activities that kids can do. So while teachers commonly ask students to write about a topic in order to assess how well they understand the material, the process of writing also improves the student's ability to recall information, make connections between different concepts, and synthesize information in new ways. In effect, writing isn't just a tool to assess learning, it also promotes it. So again, the idea of writing being a comprehensive strategy comes into play here as well. And again, for our novice students who don't have a lot of experience in writing, for a variety of different reasons, we need to try to give them additional practice when the opportunities present themselves. As this caption says, you might want to keep your words to the exclamation points ratio higher than 1-to-1, because again, for kids who are writing and want to emphasize something, the punctuation issue always rears its ugly head as well. So by requiring students to do 3 types of essay writing, argumentative, informational, and narrative, the course take the claim for writing is central to the American curriculum. And it represented a sea change after the era of No Child Left Behind, or Nickelby, as we sometimes called it, the 2002 federal law that largely overlooked writing in favor of reading comprehension assessed by standardized multiple choice tests. So as we get into the process, one of the things that we mentioned, or was mentioned in your IQs, Chapter 10, was the notion of summarization. So if you turn to page 89, you'll see a little device that a friend of mine that I work with created, Karen Lopez out of the Hart District. We do ERWC instruction together. She created this idea called Fat Sentences. Some of you might know her. And Fat Sentences is a good way to create sentence starters for either an essay, but it also can come into play in terms of the paraphrase on the quick write. And again, what you have here are 4 aspects of the summary introduction that are interchangeable parts. The 4 areas are the focus, the author's name, the title, and then the text type. So if we look at these examples here that she took from our article from Sports Illustrated, we start here with the focus. So the first sample says NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell is portrayed as a peacemaker, and that's the focus. and then the author by Peter King, and then the text in his Sports Illustrated article, and then the title, Man of the Hour. So what we do with this is we share it with the students, and we have them underline the parts as we call them out. So in the second one, we would ask them to see if they can underline the author, and then the focus, and then the text and the title. I can tell you that the challenge for students is determining the focus because they're accustomed to looking for a topic, and a topic is different from the focus because the focus of the article is really more in depth. So this is where they need a little bit of practice. But this is a great strategy to share with them and have them actually write a few of these as either starting a summary or as a part of the paraphrase in the quick write. The other thing is that the quick write itself is a fairly good scaffold for a summary because your paraphrase, including this type of fat sentence, would be your starting point for the summary. And then the 5 words that you collect provide the necessary information to complete the summary. So that's another way to think about using the quick write as you begin the process. So again, this is on page 89, and you have it as to make a copy if you want to guide your students through this process. I found it very, very helpful for my students. Here's an example. If you remember the TASER article from eons ago when we first started the class, here we have the text, the title, the author, and the focus. In his article, questions linger about the TASER. So you have the article and then the title, and then the author, Larry Gable, and then the focus discusses the controversy over the use of the TASER and how Amnesty International wants more information about the risks to people's lives. So again, by introducing fat sentences to your students and then having them practice these and actually begin using a summary or writing a paraphrase in the quick write will make it very simple for them to get started. So oftentimes for our students to get them launched into writing that type of summary or the hardest part is the first sentence. So this takes care of that issue. And then once they once they have this down, they can go through and complete the task. So anyway, this is pretty self-explanatory, and it's on page 89 for you. The other thing that we know that's difficult for our students is the idea of actually analyzing a writing prompt. So this is a sheet that I have in Canvas for you as a blank template. It's from our program Inside the Text. And what we did here is we had an article in the program. All of our articles are informational text because that's what students are going to need to have the most when they get to college. But the article, this particular one, is about the earthquake in Japan and the meltdown of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. So we wanted to come up with a prompt and a way to analyze it. So this is the process and the way it works. So the prompt says, and we follow, if you notice in chapter 9, there was reference to the RAFT technique. So this follows the role, audience, format, and task type of format, which is a great way to analyze your own ability to write a prompt. So you're a citizen who lived near the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. During the disaster, you lost your home and your property. You have been asked to report in an essay to the government's nuclear commission advocating that the country no longer use nuclear power. What evidence will you include to support your views? So that is essentially your performance prompt. So question number 1 says, a writing prompt begins with some background information known as the setup. And then we have them underline the sentences that set up the assignment. So they go back and they underline that in the prompt. Then number 2, we begin to analyze it using the RAFT. So using the RAFT technique, finish analyzing the prompt. The first one is the role. Who are you supposed to be to answer it? A student, a politician, in this case, a citizen from Japan, from Fukushima. And then they write it in there. And then the audience, whom are you writing to? Is it a friend, a particular group? And of course, this is the Nuclear Commission. Then format, check to see what type of writing you're doing. Is it an essay, a letter, a speech, a story, a description, an editorial, a report, and write that there. And then we ask them in this sentence to determine Which sentence in the prompt will tell you what you have to do? In other words, what's the task? So question words like why, how, or what may tell the task. If the question is why, you have to give reasons for why something is done. If the question word is how, you will explain the way something is done. And if the question word is what, you will describe a number of different things. So what we ask them to do here is to copy the sentence that actually isolates the actual task that they're supposed to do. So by breaking down the components of the prompt, it avoids having kids becoming confused about what they're supposed to do, okay? So this again is posted to you in Canvas. Everything is in it except the prompt itself, which is left blank for you to fill in your own prompt. And again, once you follow the RAFT technique and write in a performance prompt, then the rest is pretty simple. Now, if you'll turn to page 90, you'll see something called the simple informational essay construction, which I want to walk you through tonight. There are a lot of different ways that we actually use essays, but what I found what my kids needed wasn't an essay structure that worked on narrative. They needed an essay structure that worked on informational, because that's the type of writing that they're going to be doing. So the article is going to explain for you what I'm going to talk about next. I'm going to walk you through the process that I use with my students. Why informational writing is important, as Laura Robb says, it's the deal breaker. Informational writing is to develop myriad of strategies for building content and find ways to organize and synthesize our learning. Writing nonfiction refines thinking skills in the organization of ideas and our understanding of the world. And again, it serves that element of comprehension. Also, it improves communication and problem-solving skills in writing, and eventually changes problem-solving strategies in all areas of learning. So we know the inherent value of conducting this writing. So in the TASER unit that we did, this was the performance prompt, and they could choose one of two. And if you remember the article talked about how the police commission was in favor of use of the TASER, but Amnesty International was concerned because people were dying from the effects of the TASER, and nobody ever knew the long-term effects that it had on people. So these are the two prompts, and they could choose one or the other. So prompt A is your human rights organization member will analyze the effects of the TASER and its use in order to publish a written essay or commentary to be delivered to the police commission, explaining why the use of the TASER should be stopped. And then in prompt B, it's the counterpoint. You're a member of the police commission who will analyze why the TASER use needs to be continued in order to publish a written essay or commentary explaining the benefits of the TASER's use. You will deliver this published commentary to a panel of human rights organizations. So again, we follow the role, audience format, and task, or RAFT format. So the schematic that we use is here, and you'll find this on page 95 in your reader. And I also have this posted for you in Canvas. Normally in an in-person class, we would actually do this where I walk my students through it, but we'll just walk through it in a talk through tonight, since we are not in the same place. But I want to walk you through how I use this with my students. And I do want to mention that at the end of the semester, when we do the departmental essay exam, my students scored the highest of all of the other developmental reading writing courses. So I think I'm really onto something here. And again, there are a lot of different structures that you've seen for essays. My contention is, or my stipulation is, that this is foundational and that it gives kids a basis on which to begin to learn how to do this type of writing. It's not the be all end all. It's really nothing more than a launching pad. And, you know, some people will say, well, the 5-paragraph essay, that's old hat, that's dead. Nobody uses that anymore. Well, I think that's the problem, that so many kids come in here without any kind of foundation to do any kind of writing, particularly when it comes to informational writing. And this is why the first essay that my kids did looked a lot like a letter to grandma. So I wanted to come up with an experience that was pretty common and a shared experience that everybody would have had by the time they got to me. And what we agreed upon was that everybody at one time in their life had ridden a bicycle. So the prompt that we made up, and again, part of the idea here is to lighten the concept load, to give them a focus on the process itself. but also to provide them with a model they could use in drafting subsequent essays. So here's the prompt. You've been asked to write a short 5-paragraph essay on bicycle safety. Your audience is a group of young new writers. The essay will be included in a brochure that will be given out as new writers purchase their bicycles. So that's the purpose of the prompt that we're going to do. Then we had to brainstorm some of the things that we would want to add into that essay. So we came up with 3 ideas, because this is going to be the body of the essay. So 3 subtopics, as I call them, were the right kind of equipment, where you're going to ride your bike, or where the new rider is going to take their bike, and how to ride their bike. So this would comprise the body of the essay. And then we had to brainstorm each of the different components that we would use here. So for equipment, the kids came up with, well, a helmet, lights, pads, air pump, and shoes. In terms of where to ride, they come up with the bike path, the bike lane, parks, mountains, the beach, which is probably the bike path, and then streets. And then for how to ride, we came up with controlling our speed, hands on the handlebars, follow street signs, and maintain balance. So typical things you might think about as a bicycle rider, okay? So then the first process was to come up with a thesis. And the thesis is supposed to answer a question. So what kind of question are we trying to answer? The question we're trying to answer is, how can a new rider stay safe on their bicycle? So the thesis we came up with was, new riders will stay safe by following a few simple rules to avoid injury while riding. And if you notice on the schematic on page 95, where it says thesis, we would have the kids fill in this thesis. Now, again, you have to remember, my kids right out of high school, and their reading and writing level was probably middle school at best. So this is going to be pretty basic stuff. But what they needed to have, after I assessed my students, was they needed to have a basic model of how to actually work through the process of writing an essay. So we came up with this thesis, and that would go in the thesis section. Now, the next thing we did after writing the thesis was to come up with a hook. You know, what do we want to use to grab our students, grab the reader's attention? So one of the ways we do this is typically done is what we call an occasion position sentence. So when riding a bicycle, which is the occasion, the position is one must be careful to avoid injury, something like that, okay? I wanted to do one that had a little more zip. So my hook was, bicycle riding can be a great form of recreation, but hundreds of people are injured each year in bicycle accidents. So that has a little bit more pop to it, yes? Okay. So then another thing that I realized was in the place of my students' essays where the introduction would be, they start explaining everything in the introduction, which is why the typical essay is only 1 paragraph long, even though it's 2 or 3 pages. All right, so we need to somehow give it structure. So in the schematic, we have 2 things done already. We have the hook and we have the thesis. So now we have the components of the introduction, which are going to be the subtopics. So subtopic 1 says, new riders must be sure to have the proper equipment to stay safe during their ride. Now, this is where 2 things happen. One is, right after this, they start telling you all about the different equipment, right? No, we can't have that happen because this is the introduction. So we make sure that they understand this is the only thing they're going to say in the introduction. The other thing is that they'll start a sentence like this. You must be sure to have the proper equipment, right? So what I tell my students is we try to get rid of the second person and have the editorial voice. So there's a rule that there's no you or no I in the essay, that we want it written in third person, because that's the most frequent type of writing they're going to have to be doing in their content classes. Now, some people will say, well, I'll accept you, or maybe even I, but we're shortchanging our students because when they get to college, the editorial voice is what they're going to need to have a command of. And so we try to wean them off of that idea right away. The second subtopic has to do with where we take the bike. So choosing a proper place to ride and knowing the surroundings can help the new rider avoid any serious injury. And then the third subtopic is how a rider controls their bike and follows rules of the road will also ensure a safe and fun ride. So there's our introduction. And again, all we've done is told everybody what we're going to be talking about in the essay. We haven't revealed any real information. So what I tell my students is that the introduction is really just a handshake. And you'll get more down to the meat of the matter as we get through into the body. The other thing people will ask is, well, does the thesis have to follow the hook? And actually, no, it doesn't. Some people will have the thesis as the very last statement in the introduction, which is okay. But for my students, I want them to have consistency just so they can accommodate to the new pattern, so that when we actually start the essays, they become more comfortable with it. And then we can alternate later. I don't want to have any gray area here. So we keep it pretty consistent. Then we go to the second paragraph where we start the body of the essay. And the first sentence is a transition. So riders who are new to riding a bicycle should have proper equipment to stay safe. So in this paragraph, we're going to be talking about equipment, right? So the first thing that we decided to talk about was the helmet. So the first detail is the helmet. One important piece of equipment is the riding helmet. Now, the other thing that I found, as some of you might find also is true, is that two things. One is that students don't elaborate. They give you a very short, choppy sentence, and they don't carry it further. And they write what I call the bumper sticker answer, which is a few words here and then they move on. So in this structure, what we require is for every detail, there have to be 2 sub-details. So I call it the rule of 2. And it's tattooed onto their corpus callosum by the time they leave my class. So for every detail, there needs to be at least 2 sub-details. So tell me 2 things that I need to know about wearing the helmet. So one is that the helmet needs to fit securely so that it doesn't come off in case of a fall. And the second thing is offered by the students is that wearing a helmet will help the rider avoid a serious injury in case of a fall, right? 2 things that I need to know about the helmet. There could be 3, but I use the rule of 2 just as a foundation or a launching pad. And then now we have another detail, so let's pick another piece of equipment. All right, so let's pick lights. New riders should make sure that their bikes are equipped with front and back lights. Pretty simple, right? Now tell me 2 things I need to know about having lights. Sub-detail 1, lights will help to see the rider go where they're going when they're riding in the dark. And sub-detail 2, cars that are driving at night will be able to see riders who are properly using their lights. Basic stuff, but again, we're following an organizational pattern here that we want to embed in the student's schema for writing, okay? So that takes care of the second paragraph. And again, we are not limited to these paragraphs. We can add more paragraphs and more details and more sub-details as we want. But again, we're trying to just make it very foundational for our students who don't have the background in this area. And then we go to subtopic 2, and we generate another transition sentence. So another factor that can keep a rider safe is where they decide to take their bikes. All right. So where would you like to take your bike today? So the student said, let's take it to the bike lane. All right. So a bike lane provides a designated place to ride while on the surface streets. So then we need to come up with 2 things that we need to know about the bike lane. So one sub-detail is that the rider should stay in the lane and go in the same direction as the traffic. What's another thing that I need to know about the bike lane? And I'll ask the students to give me an idea, and then we'll put it into a sentence. So in this case, it might be the rider has to be careful in the bike lane because sometimes cars will come into the lane when making a right turn, or they may come up with something else entirely. This is where I now start to engage in what we term lovingly gradual release of responsibility. So on the template, we'll generate an idea, and then I'll write it down, and then they'll again write that idea down. And then we go to the second detail, and we decide to take our bikes to parks. So parks have become a more popular place to ride. And one sub-detail that we need to have is that when riding in a park, the rider has to watch for families and small children. Okay, and who can give me another sub-detail about riding in a park? What's another second thing that I need to know about riding in a park? And that might be the rider has to be very careful when riding in the park because animals may run in front of the bicycle, and these could include dogs, cats, squirrels, and frogs, for instance, or lizards. Okay, so we'll go ahead and include that. And that becomes our sections of detail. And then we go to the next paragraph, and now we're into subtopic 3. Subtopic 3 is how to ride your bicycle. So then the sentence that we create for our transition is it's important for a rider to be able to control how they ride their bike in any location. And the detail 1, it's important for the riders to keep their hands on the handlebars at all times while riding. And then we'll generate 2 sub-details that are important for that. So hands on the handlebars will help the rider when making a turn, and hands on the handlebars will keep the rider from falling when they apply their brakes, something like that. And then detail 2, we'll come up with another subtopic, or another detail rather, about how to control the bike. So maybe it's a matter of controlling our speed or obeying traffic signs, something like that. And then we'll plug in 2 more sub-details. So that's how we begin to compose the essay and give them a format and a structure for their foundational beginning essay. And then we go to the conclusion. And in the conclusion, we restate the thesis, but in different words. New bicycle riders need to pay attention to how to ride safely. And then restate subtopic 1. Having the proper equipment will allow the rider to avoid injury. Restate subtopic 2. When choosing a location to ride, one must be aware of any possible risks that might cause an accident. And then we restate subtopic 3. Maintaining control of the bike will also help to ensure a safe ride and reduce the risk of injury. And then we do what I call an unhook, where we kind of wrap it up and send the reader on their way, or the reader, or in this case, the rider. Bike riding is fun, but remember, safety first. And that's our unhook. So that's how to create the essay. And what I found is when we would draft our essays in class, we would always do it on the schematic, at least for the first couple of them, until they got more accustomed to it. And then we would generate an essay. And then this time, for the next one, I might say, I want you to include 3 details. And this time it'll be 6 subtopics. So we want to expand it and grow it more organically from within. So this is how we can give our kids a foundation. And in the article, you'll see a description of what I just talked about using the bicycle essay. And then you have the schematic in front of you in the page 95 through 99. And if you notice on the very last part of the schematic on page 99, there's a few things that we want to explore and in terms of criteria. One is, did the writer follow the format? Now, the thing that happens here when they're doing this kind of essay, particularly one with the taser, is they're going back and they're using the article and really trying to pull out those details and those subtopics that they have to explore. So in the taser essay that I showed you, there were 3 different perspectives that we used. One was the perspective of the police commission. The other one was the perspective of Amnesty International. And the third one, we kind of put them into the mix by having them determine why they feel that the taser should or should not be used. And in that one, the only thing that happened in the thesis was the change from should use to should not use. So they could pick the prompt and apply it to that way and then go through and pull out the details and the subtopics that they needed to create that essay. And that was the first one that we drafted. And it was a bit of work, but they finally were able to deal with it. Of course, you run into unforeseen things, like a lot of kids would try to do it in Word and they weren't familiar with Word, or they didn't know how to format or things like that. So I had them actually handwrite it onto the schematic before they eventually went and typed it out. So they had a draft that they could use. We could look over the draft, make suggestions in a writer's conference, and then go from there. But that's how the schematic works. Okay? Any questions on that process? So after the essay, then we did conduct a performance assessment, and I think they did pretty well. So I'll let you take a look at this.
Ready, Sam? Ready, mate. Rider 22, Sam Reynolds. 3, 2, 1. Rider on hold.
Not bad after one little 5-paragraph essay, right? Anyway, I guess the moral of the story is don't try that at home. Okay. In the beginning of class, I asked you to write a reflection on an interpretation of a quote call from Barack Obama, said the future is not a gift, it's an option. Can I get some people to share what they interpreted that quote to mean? Okay, Malia?
I said that choices you make determine your future. And then I said that nothing is guaranteed.
Okay. All right. Let's hear another one. Who'd like to share one? Okay. Let's see. It's
me.
Taylor.
Well, I did like a paragraph. I thought that's the last one. But I said gifts are given to you despite your life choices. Your future success depends on your choices now. If you make good choices, you earned a successful future. If you make bad choices, you earned an unsuccessful future. It's a reward, not a gift.
Thank you. Okay. So the idea is a paragraph, right? That's what we want our students to produce. Okay. But let's hear another one. Would like to share one. Michelle?
Yeah, so it's sort of similar to what Taylor said, but the thing is that I said that the future you cannot always expect the future to be a good future. In this case, that it's not guaranteed that a person could always have like a bright job or like a bright personality. What really matters is that what you do now will change the future. That's why in the last section, that future is an option is what hits me.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Let's hear another one. I'd like to share one. Mike Reed.
I wrote, our future is whatever we choose to make of it. We can choose the option of creating opportunities for ourselves to advance and grow, or we can choose to do nothing.
Okay. Thank you. Now let's hear another one. Okay, Marisol?
Well, I didn't write my response because I was still in the car, but when I heard it, it made me think of that saying, the only thing that's stopping you is yourself, essentially. And so just really reminding ourselves that at the end of the day, our future and what we do or do not accomplish, it's on no one but ourselves. And so you have the choice or the option to make of it what you will, so long as you're willing to take those risks.
Okay, thank you. All right. Anybody else?
Okay. I put that a future is always going to be given. Granted, it might be altered depending on your actions, but a future is always going to be provided. no one ever loses their future unless something drastic happens. But other than that, everyone has a future.
Okay, thank you. So a couple things that I observed with my students was that, first of all, they're very unlikely to speak up in class, not unlike my graduate students. So I wanted to come up with a way that would encourage them to speak up, but also to engage in some writing that would get them thinking. And so what I came up with was the idea of what I call quotables. So if you turn to page 100, go back on my screen here. The way that I used the quotables was that after we did our quick write, after we did some reading, and then we did the interior monologue based upon the reading that we did, then I would put a quote up on the board, and I would have the students take out a sheet of paper, and they would keep it like a running journal of these interpretations. So, of course, they put their heading on it. The title of the paper is Quotables, and then the left-hand margin to the left of that red line, they would put in the date, and then they would, on the right-hand side of that margin, that red line, we would number the quote, and then they would have them write the quote. And then I would give them about 5 minutes or so to write their interpretation. Oftentimes, though, what I would do would be to spend a few minutes talking about the quote in terms of how to, I guess, unpack it, for lack of a better word. So we talked about, what does it mean in terms of the future? What does the future mean in more generic terms? And then what about a gift? What is a characteristic of a gift? Something that's given to you. And what is the characteristic or defining parts of the word option? And then we talked about that to get them seated into how they could respond to the prompt. And then we would have them write the prompt, analyze it in their interpretation. And then we would play a game that I lovingly called Impress Your Professor and Your Classmates. And I would call on volunteers to read their quote, what they wrote about the quote. And I would put a little check mark. I told them they would get extra credit if they read the quotable. But really what I was doing was, trying to encourage them, but also I was tracking the kids who weren't speaking up, so that eventually I could call on them to read their quote, their interpretation. And simply, if I didn't have a student who was, after a while, if I didn't have students who were participating, I would just say, let me call on you, Francisco, because I need to get you on the scoreboard. I mean, I need to get you on the books, or whatever. So then they would read what they wrote. It was as simple as that. What I found was this is probably, and in the evaluations at the end of the semester, the quotables was one of their favorite things, because they really enjoyed the thinking process and being able to reflect, but they also enjoyed hearing the viewpoints from other people. And if you look at the quote at the top, honestly, I love the quotables. I don't like to read out loud, but I love to write. I love to think about a quote and explain what I think it means. It gets me thinking. I love to think deep into things, so the quotables are great. And that's kind of one of the comments that one of my students shared with me. Another comment was, again, the future's not a gift, it's an option. This quote best applies to my life because I always say I'm going to do something and then procrastinate. Instead of saying you're going to do it, just do something, just do it. Don't talk about how you're going to do it. This quote to me means you have to prove yourself or prove people wrong. I like to prove myself and prove people wrong, so I just do it. And then this one here, the quote was, it doesn't matter if you get knocked down, it's getting back up that counts. The quote means the world to me because many people wanted me to stay down, and even when I fall, I still get up and try with a smile on my face. I want to prove to myself and let everyone watch me get up. As long as you try again, you're never a failure. And then some of these can go fairly deep. This one, again, was the quote, the old Eugene O'Neill quote, you might as well be yourself because everyone else is taken. I think this quote has a lot of meaning because growing up without a father figure and not having brothers and sisters, it's hard to survive in this world full of people being different and acting different around others. You grow up thinking of becoming what you see around you, not what you really want. Growing up is really hard to do because everybody has friends and are popular. I was that girl that nobody paid attention to and I went into depression. I decided to become someone I wasn't. I started dressing differently, and I always had to put on a lot of work to get people to talk to me. I started becoming a monster instead. And instead of people talking to me, they talked behind my back. I wasn't feeling good about what I was becoming. I told my mom to help me, the real me, and help me understand what life was about. Thanks to my family, I'm where I am now, and I am who I am becoming. So again, these quotes can kind of touch deep and are very interesting, and the article will describe the quotes. But if you turn to what would be page 105 in your reader, I've given you about 120 quotes that you can use if you want to participate in this process. And some of these are just, good old Americana type quotes that kids don't have an interest, that don't have a knowledge of. But other ones are kind of interesting. One of the ones that really generated a lot of discussion was, let's see if I can find it. I don't see the number here, but the quote was, "You can't judge a book by its cover." And that really, really generated a lot of discussion on the part of our students, because they talked about how people judge them and how they judge other people. It was really just a very inspiring discussion that we had. Another one that generated a lot of discussion was number 7. It says, "Everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, he will live his whole life believing that it's stupid." And that was another one that was really surprised me in terms of the amount of discussion that we had based on these. So these quotables are here for you should you decide to use them. And again, some of them are, fairly basic. There was another one that was a little bit interesting too. It's one of my favorite quotes. It says, "If you give a dance, you've got to pay the band." And one of my students took it literally, say, well, if you're going to put on a dance and the band is going to be there, you have to pay them. But that really, they missed the point of the quote. So we had to, other students were able to correct that and give her a different kind of perception. But again, the quotables was one of my favorite things that the kids responded to in the evaluations. And so, you can look these over, and sometimes the quote, in my case, he even having to lined up with the book we were reading at the time. So I would ask them to analyze the book based upon the perspective of the protagonist or somebody in the story. So sometimes you'll have that opportunity. But again, the goal here was focused on looking at standards around speaking and listening, and then also getting kids to write in a way that would build in reflection. So I found it to be a very useful thing. Okay. So let's take a read of part 2 and see what else is in here for you. So if you turn to page 105, one of the things that we find is that our students don't understand that writing is a process, that there are components and stages that you do when you are involved in any kind of writing for school anyway. So this is a handout that you can give to the students and go over with them the different aspects of what the writing process is. Again, we can't assume that kids know that we engage in a pre-writing process, or that we have a first draft, or that in the second draft we actually do some revision. A lot of kids will say that, will think that revising is just writing it again more neatly, right? So we want to move them off of that idea and get them into some more deeper understanding about what the revision process is. And so you'll find on page 106, again, the other guidelines about revising. And getting them to determine, a lot of times when kids are writing, the only audience they write for is the teacher. But we want them to write for other people, which is why the idea of using the raft sequence is really good for giving kids a sense of to whom are they writing, right? So they have an idea, because that influences the type of voice that they're going to use in their writing. And then they are going into editing, and then the final is publishing. So when we break down the process and show them these different components, for some of them, it's a whole new insight, because they're used to just writing it pretty much on the fly, right? And so we want to give them a process to explore. And of course, what this means, an implication for us, is that it's taking more time, all right, to get into the instruction. On page 107, there are some characteristics about what we call writing to learn tasks, that oftentimes they're short and they're timed. So again, this could be a journal entry, it could be a point of view guide, or various other things that you've seen in chapter 9, that this should be done frequently. Oftentimes in a journal entry, there's really no structure, so we don't really worry about spelling or grammar, things like that. We just want them to get used to the idea of writing in a way that's more free form and more liberating. We also may take opportunities to have them do shared experiences where we will share our responses with other students so that they get an idea. And then, we can do a table text, as we call it, where we'll have a student respond in writing to their initial writing as well, if it's a journal entry or something like that. And then again, very little structure involved. And again, whether you grade them or not is entirely up to you. I usually just did a check mark on the quotable, let them know that I was looking at them, and then they went back in the pod folder. Another handout for the students is on summarizing on page 108. And again, this shows you rules of the game. First, they have to read it, and then they have to parse it into the more essential ideas. This is really a construct for what the paraphrase actually does in initial response, and then, excuse me, providing more elaboration later on. Now, on page 109, it's kind of a fun activity to do. It's a review strategy, and it's called the ABCD Fact Report. And the way this works is that if you look on page 110, you'll see a list there with alphabetical letters in alphabetical order on the left-hand side. When they're reviewing information, what they have to do is they have to generate a sentence where the first letter is that letter. So if we were going to be doing an ABCD Fact Report on the crocodile, you might say your first sentence would be: the crocodile lurks in the waterways of Africa, Australia, Latin America, and Florida. For B, it might say, be careful when you're around a crocodile because they can run as fast as a human. And then for C, it might be something like crocodiles have been around for 170 million years and they're hunted for their skins and their for purses and shoes. And then D, defending yourself against a crocodile is pretty useless because their jaws will rip you apart. Something like that. So again, it's just sort of a fun way to use some language development and get kids to review the information. And on page 110 and 111 are two templates for you for the ABCD Fact Report. Great way to do group discussion and great way to engage in review. A little bit different type of review than what we did last week with structural indexing. Remember our extensive work on lemmings. I think in this class you probably learned more about lemmings and crocodiles than you ever thought you would. And then for creative writing in content areas, if you turn to page 112, you'll see the I am writing. This is similar to the point of view guide or similar to the interior monologue. And there's a format here, but if you look at the box in the middle, you get an idea. It becomes fairly obvious. I am the rainforest. Animals live on me. I have fresh green plants and the most beautiful flowers. The smells are fragrant blossoms and earth, sweet water. Waterfalls make music, etc., etc. So you get an idea of the characteristics and the questions that guide the prompt are on the bottom here. Okay, so what do you need? What are you feeling, etc., etc. It'd be fun to apply this to an inanimate object, like I am the taser. I need people to use me. I get a charge out of, hitting people 21 feet away, things like that. It's kind of a fun thing. Creative as well. And then on page 113 is another example. I am the flag. So you get an idea of how it encourages more extensive writing along the way. Okay. Then for more creative writing too, we can add an element of poetry into the writing. So there are different forms of poetry we can use. One is an acrostic, where we write the word vertically and have kids fill in descriptors to finish it off. Another type of poetry is a cinquain, which is a 5-line poem that's descriptive, and the criteria are here. You start with a 1 word, then you go to 2 words, and then 3 words, 4 words, and then back to 1. And you can get an idea from the example there. And these are just fun ways, and these could even be done as exit slips or something like that, as a way of just getting kids to be a little bit more creative and bring that right brain into the instructional part. And then 2 more. On page 115, you have the Diamante, which is another formula poem that has a shape like a diamond. And then the haiku, which is also another form of being able to express the content. Just different ways of getting kids to see that writing is more than just the typical essay or the short answer questions that they're accustomed to. 2 more things in the reader. On page 116 is conference questions if you're going to have a writing conference with your student. But this is really something that they would fill out before you have the conference, right? So what things do I like about the writing? What do I want to know more about? What is the writer's meaning, my main point? While this is set up for peer conferencing is oftentimes risky business because you don't know the skill level of the students who are doing the conference and leading the conference. So I like to have the students do their own reflection on the writing first, and then we talk about it that way with these prompts here. And then lastly, an editor's checklist on page 117. Now, when I was working with a 6th grade science class, and we were talking about writing, I asked the class, how would I know that something you've written is good? And so one student raised his hand and he said, well, every sentence would begin with a capital letter. I said, okay. Who else? And then a young lady raised her hand and I called on her and she said, every sentence would end with a period. Okay. And then I called on another student and they said, every word would be spelled correctly. I said, okay. Anything else? And that was about it. So it gave me a baseline to think about what I needed to share next in terms of how we want to begin to have a more organic approach to writing. So the editor's checklist was more of a developmental thing as opposed to just blasting everybody with all of these different criteria. So I may pick 2 or 3 and then build on it by adding another one so that we develop this over the course of time so that I can infuse more direct instruction into their writing and give examples and have them, again, begin to build it out over the course of the process. Okay? All right. And that, my friends, is the end of Reader Part 2. All right. Yes, party time. So, for you, this is not the one you have. You have a different one, so let me go get it. If you'll turn back in your Reader Part 1 to page 5, you'll have a keyword summarizer there to complete on the writing process. I'm going to bring it over so you can see it. Actually, on yours, we did cognitive strategies, didn't we? As the last one? Is that what yours says on page 5? Okay, we're not going to worry about the writing then, because we've already filled it out. I had to make adjustments for my other classes, so you're fine. We'll just go ahead. Okay. Well, so typically after we do this, then we have to include a couple of brain breaks to kind of see you on your way out. So here's one of them. Okay. And I saved the worst ones for last. So, Fred, did you hear about the cartoonist who was murdered? Ned, did they know what happened? Fred, no, the details are kind of sketchy. And this is the absolute worst one, but it's also my favorite, as you might guess. Ned, last night I attended a theatrical performance about puns. Fred, what was it about? Ned, it was a play on words. I couldn't resist. Okay, some final thoughts before we close out the semester. Again, Chapter 9 should be dropped into the folder tonight. You have until the 15th to get everything in. And after that, then I'll go through and after I do Chapter 9, I'll go through and recalibrate everything. I go through and read all the IQs again, and I'll make an assessment based on that. So that's how it'll work. And then I'll issue grades. You'll get them probably by the end of December, by the end of this month. So a couple of things I want to mention to you. First of all, this is our last final class session that we're going to be together on our 521 broadcast. A couple of ideas I want to share with you. First of all, early on in the beginning of the semester, I emailed you all a little kind of pre-induction type of idea about connecting to our work. So what I want to do is encourage you to go back and look through those and see if you make any adjustments in terms of your thinking based on what we've been through in this course. Secondly, you're going to send screenshots to me of your keyword summarizer, and I'd like those by the 15th. So that's when everything is due. All you have to do is just take a screenshot and email it to me. You don't have to do anything else. And then I want to mention that, as teachers, we have a tremendous amount of power over our students, more so than we even realize. And I want to share with you, this particular instance was a kid who I met in 1983, actually 82, my first year as a dean of discipline. He was my very first referral because he'd gotten into a fight. And for some reason, we developed kind of a longstanding relationship. I saw him all the way through junior high school and then high school, and then he got married and had some kids and had things going on and worked a number of jobs. But I've been mentoring this kid now since 1982. And last couple of years ago, excuse me, a couple of years ago, he graduated from CSUN with a master's in educational leadership. He's now an assistant principal and is in the doctoral program at Cal State Northridge on his way to becoming an EDD candidate, and he'll get it, I'm sure. But the point of this is that, even the little things that we do with kids are significant to them, although they may not be to us. And so we have to always kind of carry that in our heads, that a comment we make, a look we give, a gesture may be more significant and more powerful than we realize. So it's important to kind of keep that perspective in mind as you go into the classroom. Again, we also know that a lot of kids face a lot of peer pressure from other students. So they're kind of in this grind of having to be around other kids and are very self-conscious of their own self-identity and self-concept. And so sometimes that will affect their behavior. As this cartoon plays off, they have to submit to a lot of peer pressure, but actually peer pressure. In this case, peer pressure, for all you cat lovers out there. The other thing I want to mention is that the thing about teaching is that you always feel as though you're kind of always on the edge. And a lot of times, the climate that we work in not only feels tenuous like this, but also becomes there's a lot of frustration that teachers, as well as students, but teachers too, put on other people. I call it ventilation. To that end, what we see is that there's a lot of people who complain a lot because schools are very frustrated environments, right? So some people just complain way too much, and it's very easy to get sucked into this whole psychology about complaining. As this caption says here, I'm here to complain about the length of the line. It's sort of like the same type of idea. People will complain just to complain. So I always tell this story about the particular sect of monks who were sworn to an oath of silence, but they got to say two words every 5 years. So the new session began, the monks went about their business, and then in 5 years' time, they had monk call them all together, and he said, you can have 2 words. So they went around the circle, and everybody shared their 2 words. And this one monk, when they got to him, he said these 2 words, bed hard. So they went about their business for the next 5 years. And then following that, they came back for the next 5 years, and each monk got to say the 2 words. And they got to the same particular monk, and his 2 words were food bad. All right, so then they went away again for 5 years. 5 years later, they came back. They went around again. They got this particular monk, and this monk said, I quit. And the head monk said, I knew you were going to say that. And he said, how did you know? He says, well, you've been complaining ever since you got here. The fact of the matter is that people will complain, and you don't want to surround yourself with the complainers because negative energy is contagious. Positive energy is too. So just be aware of the fact that, again, schools are stressful places, and that oftentimes people will go off. I think sometimes we just have to tell people when we've had enough. And so don't be afraid to stand up for yourself and not get sucked into the negativity. And then there's a lot of things that can be negative, even if they complain about whatever. Usually they complain about kids. But, if you surround yourself with it and you don't insulate yourself with it, it will wear you down. So that's my advice to you. As this quote says, we can't teach if we're not physically or emotionally present. We have to be more than just a body in the room. Teachers can model social skills like greeting, turn-taking, apologizing if we have made a mistake. The better our social skills, the better students do in areas of their emotional regulation, frustration, tolerance. Having a good sense of humor and being lighthearted are essential for good teaching. Learning is essentially social, and it requires a social relationship. And it's a human business, so we kind of have to emphasize that part. So if you will take a few minutes at some point between now and Monday, which is when the window closes, and do an evaluation of the course, it's your chance to get revenge. But it's helpful in helping me frame these courses that I teach, that I've been doing now since 1986. But I always refine it, and I welcome any feedback, good or bad. Of course, an online course is a totally different animal than a class in person. But anyway, any feedback you can give me will be helpful. And shall I see you at some point on campus, or you recognize me if you're on campus? Come up and say hi. Some of you, I won't know you unless you have a black box and a name in your face. But other than that, feel free to say hi and drop in or whatever. And if I don't recognize you right away, just kick me in the knee and say hello. All right? So that'll be it for the night. I want to thank you all for being with us. Hopefully you'll recognize that the readers and the textbook are a resource for you, that the IQs really are executive summaries for you to reference. So when you go back into either the articles or the VACA text itself, you'll have an idea of what the chapter is about. And that's the idea behind the IQs, is that they become useful to you as well. So with that, I want to wish you all a happy holiday. Thank you for being with us. And this will end our final broadcast of Secondary Literacy. Again, broadcasting live for the last time from our Secondary Ed studios. So good night, everybody, and stay healthy and be well and have a great holiday.
Thank you, Professor.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Professor, quick question. You
Sure.
want us to take picture for page 5 and email it to you?
Yeah, the keyword summarizers, just take a picture on your phone and email them to me.
And that's the only thing, or the other one that you also showed us, the document that you showed us also to upload it on the folder, or is it on the folder?
Which document is that? Oh, no, that should be in your folder. I just had you fill it out before the class started, so you can go back and take a look at it.
Okay, so that might be in with you already because I did it in the classroom.
Well, yeah, but I just wanted you to check it. I don't need to see it. I've already read it, but it's just I thought you might want to reflect on some of the things that might have changed your thinking based upon the class.
Nice. Thank you so much. Have a great
Elizabeth,
weekend.
congratulations
Take
on
care.
your newborn.
I appreciate everything you did. Thank you so much.
Thank
Have
you.
a great one.
You too. Be well.
Professor, can I take a quick look at the keyword summarizer? I think I'm missing one of them. Like one of the words from the chart.
Well,
are they possible?
Just email me what you have.
Okay.
Don't worry about it. Okay, more questions?
Yes, I was just like wondering how like was